Hey folks, I'm Sheridan and I have opinions on 3 rappers from upstate New York that made some songs together. Starting off with 26-year-old Anthony Kannon, who is the only one of the 3 I've met in person. He's a rapper from Ithaca, New York that originally started posting remixes to SoundCloud under the alias Infamous back in 2014 at age 14 and has risen to the status of hometown hero in the just more than 10 years since then. His unique rasp, endless flow combinations, and lyrical potency all mixed together to conjure up one of the most lethal MCs under 30, underground or not. Since his debut record, Colorblind, from 2018, Kannon has maintained a prolific output rate, releasing 5 more records and countless other singles and features, including his latest, 2023's Cautionary Tales. Anthony also co-hosted a hip-hop podcast for over 60 episodes with Upstate Aesthetic founder Andrew Kaiser and myself called The Cypher, that mostly thanks to he and Andrew was able to really create a tight-knit community of the area's creatives, even if only for a short time. Many of the relationships made through that medium are still lasting to this day. 32-year-old MBK Richy of the My Brother's Keeper collective out of Auburn is very fitting for this group, being one of the most lyrically dense rappers in the area and always performing with an energy that's second to none and also boasting an aggressively punishing delivery. Being an artist I was introduced to during the pandemic through him winning one of the competition episodes we did, I'm a bit less familiar with his background. What I do know is he has music on SoundCloud from as early as when he was 22 back in 2014. In 2018, he released his first official record, Narcissus, on streaming services, and since then has released 2 EPs and 5 more records, including his latest, Statera. Blicka, the OG of the trio, is a spry 35-year-old from Elmira who I was also originally introduced to through the Cypher, but it was immediately apparent to me how well known and respected he was in the area. After some investigation, I found music from this man as early as August 2009 under the name Blaze with a Y. If you think it can't get more 2000s than that, he literally directs folks to his MySpace link at the end of the video. My favorite part, though, is the comment that reads, "Blaze has been doing this at parties since before Drake or any of these dudes' personas were even thought up in a record label CEO's office." If you didn't get it, now you do. Having been affiliated for a while and having already collaborated with each other in the past, a class of upstate heavyweights felt inevitable at some point. But when the trio started tagging each other back in July of 2021 and post hashtagging C4H, everyone knew that something incredible was brewing. Fast forward to 2024 and we've finally been blessed with a finished product. Let's get into it. Blicka, being the eldest by 3 years in Richy's case and 9 in Anthony's, exercises his seniority, delivering a punchy and commanding opening verse to the intro track Yoda, produced by Shock One, that effectively weaves consistently clever pop culture references like the song title implies into braggadocious flexes regarding things like his various leadership capabilities when it comes to a variety of business practices, while also illustrating the perseverance he's shown in mastering his environment. Blicka's delivery and tone indicates a sense of both confidence but also that he's frustrated to even have to still be putting folks on. Even so, he makes it clear that giving out game is what he's here to do. Richy appropriately follows Blicka's verse with an aggressive energy, perhaps with less patience for the dudes falling behind. He immediately asserts his position, referring to himself as the man in charge, but also immediately leveling himself to his crew, perhaps referencing the trio on this record, but also, in my opinion, his general circle that he'd ride out for regardless. Richy makes it clear that he'll take out anyone in his way, using some pretty sinister but obviously metaphorical imagery. I'm a sucker for horror-adjacent bars, so those were a highlight for me. I think Richy's verse is the strongest on this one by a very slight margin. The baby of the group, Anthony Kannon, gets the opportunity to close the track out and does so effectively by continuing the sentiment of the earlier 2 verses, but taking a less concerned approach. He's just doing his thing, but almost half sarcastically offering support to anyone who can't hack it. He ends the track by saying, "No matter how bad things can get, I see the light. I've never been helpless in my life. Tell me what it's like." Considering the continuity between verses and the clear chemistry among these 3 heavyweights, I think this is pretty much the perfect intro track and successfully lives up to the hype and anticipation this record had among the upstate community. Moving on to the second track, Spare My Brother, Ant wastes no time returning the mic and does so with a much more intense energy. He makes it clear that the introductions are over and it's time to do his job, which he makes clear is for professionals. While acknowledging he's yet to reach the top, he boasts about his stacked resume and hints at the reasoning for his prolific reputation. After scoffing at those who have crossed him, he verbally spits on their reputations and fairly quickly passes it off to Blicka. Despite the brevity of his verse, it's so tight and fiery with enough intention that there's a strong argument he delivers the strongest verse on this one. Blicka piggybacks off Ant's last line with a much more calm and spaced out cadence than that of the previous track, which I think provides a nice breakdown between the hammering contributions both preluding and preceding it. Blicka initially comes off as calm, cool, and collected, but as the verse progresses, he delivers the hard-ass line, "I'm more Gaddafi, you was more like Gandhi," which is either intentionally or unintentionally radical as hell on top of just being so cold. One of the most harrowing lines on this whole project, though, comes at the end of his verse, when he says, "Shit, you really gotta die if you trying to find me, cause I've been living in a hell hoping God could find me." Richy gets to close this one out with clever references to things somewhat relative to the crew for hire concept, and again making clear his intention to ride out for his guys. Still, he warns that betrayal is for sure in this life, and makes clear that you always gotta look out for you and yours. I don't think this is one of Richy's most standout verses, but it still more than delivers. On to track 3, Nickel on the Scale. This one has been my favorite since first listening, which is pretty rare for me. I usually have an initial favorite that ends up falling to maybe second or third once I get more time with the project. At this point though, Crew for Hire is definitely one of my most listened to projects of the year, and I'm still absolutely obsessed with this one more than anything else on the track list. I think the trio achieves maximum chemistry over this equally accommodating sinister boom bap loop produced by Shock One yet again that I believe is entirely void of bass. Anthony opens this track up displaying some insane lyrical chops, wasting not a single line or word for the sake of rhyme. I want to try to avoid using lots of direct comparisons when I do these music reviews because I think it's lazy, but I have to point out as a major fan of both that I think Ant on this song specifically is very lyrically reminiscent of Mac Miller's early to mid 2010s output, which is my personal favorite era for Mac. The irregular and quickly shifting flows also remind me of Mac. We also get one of the only traditional sounding hooks from Ant on this track, which I think was appropriate. Blicka slides in right after Anthony and delicately dances across the first few bars with some plug talk, but flips a switch when the drums return, describing backwood-fueled paranoia in the trenches. He ends his verse, voicing his intention and right to disregard the rules normal people feel they have to follow. Blicka clearly intends to do and say what he wants. Richy wastes no time following up Anthony's repeated hook, scoffing at the idea of all love and explaining that love will get you killed, essentially advocating for selectiveness when deciding who you lend your energy to. Richy assures us that in all the years he's been doing this, he's never fumbled and doesn't plan to start now. The team is only gaining strength in his eyes. I can't stress enough how clean everyone's flow is on this one. Legitimate Song of the Year material for me. Moving on to the title track, we get a bit of an unconventional hook from Anthony that is less melodic than it is trancy and off-putting. To some, that may sound undesirable, but I believe it quite potently sets the tone for a song that is clearly trying to establish both lyrical and, I'll say, entrepreneurial dominance over their peers in an artistically menacing manner. Richy gets the first verse, which I think he was due for, and really starts snapping immediately, displaying a necessary energy that I think he's actually most consistently able to inject of the three. He sets standards, sticks to the point, and executes some subtly layered rhyming patterns and makes it appear easy. His sentiment about not being cool with some of the people he came up with is something I think most people can relate to, but in places like upstate New York, it can feel a lot more common because there are so few opportunities that when someone starts to see success or move on from the normal small town behavior, people get jealous really easy, and that can manifest in some really toxic and dangerous ways. Being from the same area, I can relate firsthand. Ant's verse is lyrically dense, but I feel like when it starts to gain some momentum in terms of substance, it's already over. I don't think the verse is weak by any means, but I think it deserves double the time. Blicka's verse, however, is incredibly dense with references, technically making 4 David Spade references in 19 words at one point, and did it effectively. As much as I love this song, I do wish the title track had longer verses from all 3 artists. I do understand the decision to go for the hook instead though, because it is very good. I just think that the song could have been a minute longer and no one that already liked it would have been disappointed. On to the halfway point of this record, we get the menacingly chilling Batteries Sold Separate, which features a cold-ass piano loop that's perfectly accompanied by a deep and monotonous bass line. Kannon shows off more of his unconventional hook skills following his lyrically dense verse that immediately make up for my wanting more on the previous track. He boasts about his prolific 2022 output in this verse, which seems to have been recorded last year, considering he refers to 2022 as last year. In general, that's definitely something I've noticed about Crew for Hire. Due to the different locations these 3 artists live in and limited times they could get into the studio, some of the references are a bit outdated, but in context of how this came together and the theme of Crew for Hire giving a movie-like aura, it doesn't actually bother me. Blicka delivers what might be the strongest single verse on this thing, kicking it off with a potent reference to the movie Juice, starring Omar Epps, most iconically known for his role as Quincy Powell or Q, in not only that film, but also for his roles as Quincy McCall in one of my favorite sports movies, Love and Basketball, and as Eric Foreman in one of my girlfriend's favorite shows, House. Without spoiling too much of the movie, Blicka invokes some intense imagery regarding having to be in the vicinity of people trying to take you out by describing the scenes where Epps' late great co-star and hip-hop legend Tupac Shakur, who plays Roland Bishop, presses Q in a crowded elevator, leading to a confrontation. This reference effectively sets the stage for the theme of the rest of his verse, which makes it clear that you won't know he's coming till he does. Later on in the verse, he pokes fun at the liquid courage that normally quiet and passive people seem to get sometimes, essentially brushing them off. Soon after comes a hilarious line hinting at the 2010 rumors about relations between Cavs player Delonte West and his teammate LeBron James's mother that West unequivocally denied in 2023 and I think is completely bogus, but likely genuinely had a lasting effect on the course of Delonte's controversial career and what followed it. That story, though, is for another video made by a different creator. A lot of people speculate that it also had an effect on LeBron's departure from Cleveland to Miami, but I think that there are way more significant factors that went into that, which is maybe something that I would be interested in covering in another video. Moving on to Richy's verse, he delivers one of his more low-key performances on this record, but it does the job and is rounded out perfectly with a line about respecting folks who keep their word and have the ability to effectively handle situations over someone who just gets money. Something I think a lot of people could learn from. Ant's hook rounds out everything really well at the end and I think wraps up one of the strongest cuts on Crew for Hire. Track 6, Retrograde, is a great example of how the weakest cut on some records would be the best on most others. There's nothing wrong with this one, it's just the least standout of the 9, and I find the beat to be a bit overly simple. On the positive end, it does definitely fit the vibe of this leg of the album, and the trio all comes ready with tight flows and engaging delivery. I just think the verses are less memorable than the rest of the record, aside from maybe Blicka's, which definitely ends off strong with this sequence. I learned from some bad dudes, a wolf kill a wolf in the same pack too. If he fucking up the move, hit your fellow. Shoulda had 2 on him like LaMelo. In my you pray to God, but you still dance with the devil. Otherwise, I liked how Richy describes the sacrifice required to attain his prowess and scoffs at the idea of any old rapper being able to put in the work that he has. Anthony also flexes his lyrical prowess towards the end of his verse, but in general has better showings both before and after this one. Approaching the end of the record, Fat Tony provides the biggest change up on this thing mood-wise. The abrupt change in production style from producer Parks is surprising but necessary to carry on the momentum. Ant once again gets the opening verse on this thing and it's super clean. I love the frequent flow changes that progressively raise and lower the energy, making for super complementary dynamics to this verse thematically. Flipping between the more strung out, slowed down flow and the punchier, fiery flow tied in really well, moving between the laid back bars into the more motivated and aggressive ones. Blicka's verse is cool on this one, but he definitely doesn't overstay his welcome to the point where his verse even seems overly brief. I don't think he phoned it in at all, but I do think he sounds hungrier on some of these other cuts. Richy, on the other hand, leaves no crumbs. He opens up his verse maintaining his motto of getting it by any means, a sentiment he's expressed in different but creative ways throughout this record as a whole. He explains how frustrating and frequent the fakes are, and levies threats towards anyone who wants to test him or his team. Towards the end of his verse, he says something outright that I think could be interpreted in a few ways, but I see the line, "I link with Kannon and Blick, we as real as it gets," as a potential declaration for lyrical and artistic superiority over the entire upstate area. If that is true, my interpretation is that it's more of a welcome challenge than it is shade at anyone. Anyone who does test him, though, he definitely sees as easy food. The second to last track, Len Bias, is named after the Maryland collegiate basketball star from the 80s. For anyone unaware, after a wildly successful 4-year career playing at Maryland from 1982 to 86, which included 2 ACC Player of the Year honors, 2 All-American selections, and an ACC championship, Bias was drafted second to the NBA's winningest franchise ever, the Boston Celtics. In one of the most tragic and sports culture-altering moments in history, Bias died of cardiac arrhythmia induced by cocaine less than 48 hours after being drafted. Musically, I think this track has some of the most engaging production on the record, and the high-octave vocal loop is a major earworm. Ant gets another opportunity to flex his hook ability, and I think does so to his greatest success on this one. It perfectly complements the verse he opens up with, as well as the ones to follow, on top of being easily the most catchy section of the album. I find myself randomly singing, "I think you bad, baby. Let's blow a bag, baby," whether in my head or out loud while doing household chores multiple times a day. Anthony begins his verse immediately addressing the song title, alleging that his family used to serve Len Bias himself, which seems like a tongue-in-cheek reference more than a genuine omission, but I genuinely am not sure. As the verse goes on, it stays consistent lyrically and doesn't see any lapses in energy, while reminding listeners that he really paved this path for himself by himself. Blicka gets the middle verse and definitely levels up on this one. Packed with 3-syllable rhymes and potent metaphors, Blicka's wisdom and experience really stands out on this track in a way that doesn't outshine and instead complements his younger collaborators. I doubt it was pre-planned, but having his verse land in the middle feels so perfect narratively. Richy gets another opportunity to be the closer on this one and definitely understood the assignment. Providing the most consistent energy track to track so far, he doesn't interrupt that trend on this one whatsoever. He kicks off this verse with a humble brag about his honesty and authenticity. He indicates the great value of his time spent and separates himself from those who waste theirs. Despite this being another instance of his verse clearly being a bit older considering the COVID mask reference, I think the imagery he depicts of it being time to go mask off is still appropriate today. I like that this track truly feels like a wrap-up before the outro. Finally, we get to the 9th and final track, The Backstory, which is surprisingly the only cut produced by frequent Kannon collaborator, Andrew Adenio. Initially, we're presented with by far the most sentimental sample. That's a chopped up vocal which repeats, "In your arms I've found the best in the world." I found the production on this one to be super fitting for not only the general vibe for an outro, but also really complemented the substance of all 3 verses, Ants especially. He continued the trend of kicking things off with this one, and I think tastefully forgoes the hook, going straight for the meat and potatoes. To me, Anthony executes easily his most potent performance of the entire record on this one, with honestly one of, if not my favorite verse on Operation Crew for Hire. He minces no words on this one, reminding the listener how recent segregation in America is in the very first line, addressing memories of his father teaching him about the blacks-only drinking fountains, which despite being outlawed now, are still fresh in the minds of many Americans that literally lived when they existed and were enforced. Just look at Ellisville, Mississippi, where not only do a pair of non-functional segregated drinking fountains built in the 1930s still exist, in 2020, the residents of Jones County voted to keep them in the courthouse even after a heartfelt testimony from resident Donnie Watts about the racism he experienced there at just 6 years old. Kannon uses that opening line to segue into how his dad also taught him to always be conscious of his environment. The tone darkens a bit as he admits his inability/refusal to seek traditional assistance for the trauma of losing family. He talks about growing up in project housing, then having the area gentrified, resulting in rising property values and rent, rendering the area unlivable for natives. This is definitely true for his hometown of Ithaca, that most recently completely ripped up its downtown area coined the Commons, which once a cultural hub bustling with the traffic of residents enjoying locally owned food spots, bookstores, and entertainment venues, is now a half-vacant corporate culture void with only a few of the classic food spots and venues left. The genius plan to fix it? An overpriced dispensary that at best helps older privileged folk gain access to a less stigmatized route of buying natural medicine, and at worst puts local dealers out of business by providing a more generally accepted as legitimate, but likely inferior product. Through a mix of climate change fear causing folks to move upstate, collegiate accommodation, and tourist targeting among other causes, the gentrification has left none of Ithaca untouched, with property values raising everywhere, but being the most impactful to the lowest income Southside neighborhoods, which is both relegating natives to the smaller outskirt towns with less opportunity and access to public services, or sending them out of state entirely. This reference actually brings Kannon's opening line about segregation full circle. Since Ithaca is such a small city, the numbers aren't frequently updated, but I would bet just about anything that the numbers I'm about to cite have only become more drastic since then. According to local publication The Ithaca Voice, the black population of Southside Ithaca has dropped from 33% in 2000 to 27% in 2016. At the same time, the less accessible Bryant Park and Bell Sherman neighborhoods have seen a 104% increase in black residents, while the similarly less accessible West Hill neighborhood, which used to account for only 7% of Ithaca's black population, now accounts for 16%. On top of that, the Asian population, which makes up between 9 and 12% of the city at any given time, had a 66% chance of living in those same neighborhoods as of 2016. Seems like those white Ithaca liberals love to preach progressive politics, but prefer them outside of their own backyard. Sorry for the tangent. I just think Ant so skillfully illustrated this situation in so few words. Anthony spends the rest of his verse celebrating and reminiscing about the journey to overcome these conditions, even citing some of the mottos, quotes, and ideas he lived by to get him here. Richy's verse is also his most sentimental of the record, and he even admits that there were obstacles in his way that genuinely tripped him up, but only prepared him to keep going. He says his mother, who passed away a few years ago, is who he does it for, along with his daughter, which are both beautiful connections to be inspired and driven by. Rich also confesses an absence of faith after losing so many people in his life, but ends his verse boasting an individually higher purpose that I think can effectively take the place of religion for a lot of people. Blicka's verse is a little less topically focused than the first two, but does a serviceable job wrapping the record up, with some more plug raps and very subtly making references to the area in his childhood, most notably Greek Peak, which is the most popular ski resort in our area of upstate where they happen to make a lot of snow. Overall, I think this was an incredible way to close out the record, and I think it was a boss move for Blicka and Richy to let the last track be the one where the young cat really shines brightest. Okay, so all in all, I think Operation Crew for Hire is such a massive artistic and cultural win for not only the upstate New York hip-hop community, but the upstate music scene in general. Even with all the talent in the area, it's hard for me to picture any other trio being able to pull a 9-song collaboration off and execute each of them to either perfection or damn near it. There's at least one song for each artist where they undeniably delivered the best performance, and I honestly don't think there's a single verse I just don't like at all on this thing. Being one of my favorite records in a year that I think is one of the deepest in terms of great music in my entire lifetime, I think I gotta give this thing at least a 9.76. All right, thanks a lot for watching, folks. This was my first ever video for Sheridan Has Opinions. I'm gonna be doing a bunch of different types of content on this channel. Let me know what you guys wanna see, and most importantly, I wanna grow this channel, so if you could help me out and like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, whatever you got to do on YouTube, all those good things, please do them. I appreciate it. It'll help. I'll keep coming with awesome content. See ya.